It all started on a seemingly ordinary evening. My husband and I had decided to order pizza instead of cooking after a long day. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door and was stunned to find a familiar face. The delivery man was Murat, an old friend from high school whom I hadn't seen in years. His warm smile and the twinkle in his eyes brought back a flood of memories. We exchanged pleasantries and he handed over the pizza, leaving me with a strange mix of nostalgia and curiosity. That first encounter felt like a harmless coincidence. However, as weeks went by, I found myself suggesting pizza more often than usual. My husband didn't seem to notice my sudden craving for takeout, but deep down, I knew it wasn't the food I was yearning for. Each delivery brought Murat back to my doorstep, and our brief conversations began to stretch a little longer each time. Murat's charm was undeniable. He had a way of making me laugh, of reminding me of a version of myself I thought I had long forgotten. His stories of our shared past, his jokes, and even the way he handed me the pizza box with a lingering glance made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was intoxicating and dangerous. One rainy evening, Murat arrived drenched from the storm outside. He apologized for the delay, explaining how chaotic the weather had made his deliveries. Without thinking, I invited him in to dry off while my husband was in the other room watching TV. It was an innocent gesture. Or at least that's what I told myself. Murat hesitated but eventually stepped inside, shaking off his wet jacket and thanking me with that familiar smile. As he sat at the kitchen table, sipping the tea I had hastily prepared, the air between us grew heavier. We talked about high school, about the dreams we had back then and how life had turned out so differently. There was a vulnerability in his voice that drew me in, and before I knew it, my hand was resting on his, a gesture of comfort that felt far too intimate. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The sound of my husband's laughter from the living room broke the spell. I quickly pulled my hand away, my cheeks flushing with guilt. Murat finished his tea and left shortly after, but that moment lingered in my mind long after he had gone. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but a part of me couldn't resist the thrill. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen glances and whispered conversations. I found myself looking forward to Murat's deliveries more than I cared to admit. We began texting, initially under the guise of pizza-related matters, but our messages soon became personal. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years, and I couldn't help but be drawn to him. One fateful evening, my husband had to work late, leaving me alone at home. I ordered pizza, knowing full well that Murat would be the one to deliver it. When he arrived, there was a tension in the air that neither of us could ignore. He stepped inside and this time, there were no excuses or distractions to hold us back. The conversation flowed effortlessly, but the unspoken words between us spoke louder than anything we could say. Before I knew it, the lines we had been carefully tiptoeing around were crossed. Murat and I shared a moment that was both electrifying and terrifying. As soon as it was over, the weight of what I had done came crashing down on me. The guilt was suffocating, but the allure of what we shared was equally overwhelming. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. I avoided Murat's calls and texts, trying to convince myself that it had been a one-time mistake. But fate had other plans. My husband, unaware of what had transpired, suggested we host a small dinner party for a few friends, including a new acquaintance he had met at work. To my horror, that acquaintance turned out to be none other than Murat. The evening was excruciating. Murat and I avoided each other's gaze, but the tension was palpable. My husband, oblivious to the undercurrent between us, kept praising Murat's sense of humor and how glad he was to have met him. I felt like I was living a nightmare, trapped in a web of my own making. After the guests had left, my husband noticed my unusual silence. He asked if everything was okay, and for a moment I considered confessing everything. But fear held me back. I lied, telling him I was just tired, and he seemed to accept my explanation. Yet, I knew this secret would not stay buried forever. The following weeks were a struggle to maintain a facade of normalcy. Murat's texts became less frequent, and I tried to focus on my marriage, desperate to repair the cracks that had started to form. But the guilt ate away at me, and I knew that what had happened with Murat had changed me in ways I couldn't ignore. Eventually, Murat moved to another city, leaving his job at the pizza place. His departure brought a sense of relief but also an inexplicable sadness. I never told my husband about what had happened, but the experience forced me to confront the flaws in our relationship and in myself. The affair with Murat was a wake-up call, a reminder of how easy it is to lose oneself in the allure of something forbidden. It left scars that I'll carry for the rest of my life, but it also taught me the importance of honesty and the consequences of choices made in moments of weakness. Though I can't change the past, I strive every day to be better. For myself, for my husband, and for the life we've built together.